Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to, I thought the very interesting observations of the speakers I'd like to comment on, including and especially the ones, really fine questions that Upendra raised, which I'd like to respond to also. But I'll begin with describing how this book came about. Sometime in the 1990s, I had a surprise discovery in a conversation with an academic scholar in a very prestigious American university. In a conversation, he said that he was involved in some activity, and he used the phrase Afro-Dalit project. Afro-Dalit project. So I wondered, well, what is that? I had never heard of such a thing. So I wanted to find out what is this Afro-Dalit project. And that's where the story starts, and one thing leads to another, and I start gathering data here and there and so on. So in a nutshell, he says, Afro-Dalit project, don't you know? I mean, it's the Dravidian and Dalits are the blacks of India, and the others are the whites of India. And the race relations that we've had in the United States of whites and blacks has been playing out in India, except they don't know it. So the Afro-Dalit project is to empower the people who ought to be the blacks of India in that frame. And so I was very surprised that somebody would do that, and I said, who's involved? How many of you are there? I thought maybe there's one crackpot, but it was a big organization. So I went to his office, and I saw a map which had India broken into Dalittstan, Dravidstan, Mughalistan, and so on. And that is the map on the cover of this book. So what you see in the cover of the book is not our imagination or our proposal, and certainly not the truth or what we would like, but quite the opposite. It is a map of an organization which has this project called Afro-Dalit Project. So I decided I better find out more about who's in it and what's going on. And he told me they're doing some management training of these Afro-Dalits. They're sending people there to do empowerment training, identity training, teaching them their history. That is the thing that got me going, that there is a fabrication of identity probably going on. Now, one of the advantages of living in the West, in the United States, is that one has a Freedom of Information Act, one has access to information, all these non-profit organizations are required to file certain financials with the government, and citizens like me have a right to access to that. So I started following, his group and where they work and who's affiliated where and who got which job, their career. I moved through their career paths. I tried to follow the money trail. I looked at which leaders get together at various conferences. I tried to attend those conferences. I found out who they are sponsoring and so on. And the thing became bigger and bigger. The story became bigger and bigger. Many of the organizations I came across were very happy to share information with me. They thought this guy's a journalist or somebody that we should tell him all the great things, because they don't see it as a problem. And there is nothing secret about it. I mean, this is not the breaking of the law. This is a project they have. They do have a right to go to another country and tell you a sense of history that maybe others don't believe in, but they do. And this money train took me to projects like, there was one interesting project I discovered in Denver called Dalit Freedom Network. And Dalit Freedom Network has not a single Dalit on its trustees. None of the officers are Dalit. They're all white Christians. So I said, well, why are these guys worrying about the emancipation of people of halfway around the world? Why are they doing it? And I found out the links. Somebody had linked with some senator, some congressman, somebody had been in some association, somebody was with some church. And then when I started asking around various friends, some of my black friends told me that some of these people don't have a good reputation with the black community because they don't support, in fact they oppose and block things that are black cause related. And some women told me that women feel that they have been against women's causes. So it was very strange that people who in their own country are not emancipators are suddenly interested in emancipating people of India. Map of the world and they have identified the window of latitude 10 degrees to 40 degrees above the equator as the target for really getting involved, converting, changing people's identities. And in this 1040, India is like 80% of the population available, because Middle East they have no access, China won't allow, so India is the big opportunity. And the interesting thing is, the Helka did a report on this Joshua project some years ago, and showed that their data collection mechanism in India is so detailed, down to the district level. They have more detail on demographics and the religion and the ethnicity and this, that, than the Indian government has, is what the Tehelka people said. And Tehelka people also said that this is linked up to the CIA. I did not verify that. But it was quite an interesting discovery of a whole network. Then I came across US set up a commission, federal government set up a commission on international religious freedom, which was under pressure of the Republican right, although it was enacted by Bill Clinton. But the Republican right wing had this agenda for a long time, and when a government is weak, as in India, they make compromises with opposition to, you support me and I support you. So one of the things he agreed to do was sign this act, under which the religious freedom, monitoring of religious freedom was part of the US now. And this is a very interesting act. It is a body of about 15 or so persons who are in charge of this commission. There is not a single Hindu or a Buddhist or a Sikh or a Jain. In other words, none of the Dharma traditions is represented. Most of them are very radical right-wing Christians. This reports on the state of religious freedom in every country in the world except the United States. So I went to several headquarters, and I would invite myself. Some people were so happy to receive me, they would give me a whole box of literature, thinking, we'll tell this guy good stuff. Some of them gave me a whole slideshow about their India. I wanted to know, what's your India strategy? So I went to the Mormons, I went to the Lutherans, I went to all kinds of churches and think tanks and secular groups and human rights groups, and I wanted to know, what's your India strategy? I compiled a huge amount of data. It was first a bookshelf, then it became a cupboard, and soon I needed an assistant just to organize it. And this has been going since the 90s. And I quite didn't know where I'm going, where it's heading, what does it mean. But it was very fascinating, like, detective work or some kind of puzzle solving kind of work. And I found that there were private foundations involved, there were some academics. There are academics who are also the CIA or State Department, or they have a dual one with something with the church. There's a lot of academics like that. Now, this is not to say that there aren't very good, solid, clean, autonomous thinkers. There certainly are. But to one of Upendra's points, when you do an investigation on a problem, you naturally focus on the problem. I mean, if you do an investigation on some epidemic going on, you don't look at how many people are healthy. You look at how many diseased people there are. If you look at a problem on corruption, you don't say, well, let's make a database of all the honest people just to make sure, we're giving them credit. You have people in the United States on a large scale study India. Who studies India? What are they looking for? What is the output? What is the strategic value of the output? How much money is being spent? Where does this money come from? This is what I want to study. Now, one of the things that inspired me to make it systematic is that China does a report, an annual report. Japan does an annual report on the state of China studies in the United States and the state of Japan studies in the United States respectively. They do a report. The government wants to know, what are these few thousand scholars studying us for, and what do they produce? So we know where to intervene. We know how to equalize the debate, not censor, not deny them freedom, not tell them to stop. But we ought to know what they are doing, so we can also have our delegations go there and make counter arguments. I'm the only person who has gone to this, there's something called South Asian Studies Conference for 35 years in Madison, Wisconsin, to buy all the proceedings. And they wanted to know, nobody ever wanted to buy all the proceedings. Usually you get proceedings for the year that you've been. So they were just worrying, who's this guy? So I said, I just want to study the conference series over 35 years. What topics are presented, what topics are not presented, who are the speakers, who are the panelists, where is this discourse. So through various means I managed to get, like, I think except for 2-3 years I've got all of them. And I had a group of graduate students from Princeton scan all this and start analyzing what gets studied through their various government administrations, what was in the Nixon administration and Bush administration, what were they studying about India at different periods, and then what was the Indian political scene like. So try to see whether the US study of India is correlated with their posture towards India politically, and in fact it is. And to see how this compares with the study of China, for example. And it's very, very interesting. I have a whole monograph on India and China at Harvard. I've done a comparison, just Harvard. The India studies and China studies at Harvard, how they differ. And there's a huge difference in that. By the way, the most positive domain of India studies is in business schools, because they're presenting the India story as an investment. Humanities and liberal arts are still the old Cold War idea of India as a basket case of human rights problems and issues and interventions and the kind of problems we're discussing in this book. The business schools are not talking about this, they're talking about it as a fantastic place to go invest money, so it's a positive story. But this is recent, this is very recent. So if you were to keep the business side aside, and look at the study of India and China, for instance, in major universities, you'll find that it is not the same, it is not a symmetrical place. And it is also interesting that in most of the conferences on China studies, the Chinese consulate or Chinese ambassador or some great guys from China would come, inaugurate, they would be the big shots. They clearly had some, if not control, a strong influence. Whereas in the case of India studies, I did not find the Indian government, Ministry of External Affairs and people of that sort really having much say. In fact, a Consul General from New York, Indian Consul General from New York, going to such an event, calls me up, says, I'm going there, and he's sort of worried that he'll be ganged up against, all these. It was perceived that I'm walking into a trap of negative talk. And I told him, I said the government should take, you should play a positive role. It's not that we have to stop them from doing what they're doing, because we can't. But creating that as a counter voice is not at all an act of denying other people their freedom, but to expand the discourse by having our own freedom. And in that regard, I'll tell you, my daughter is in one of the prime universities in the US doing her master's degree in international relations. So it's very interesting to see how the training, grooming the next generation of scholars who become specialists in various areas. So one of her papers is, one of the courses is that they made a list of all the minorities in many countries. So there's 200 minorities listed, many of them in India, some of them we are talking about in this book. Balochistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, different areas of Pakistan, Iraq, various places like that. They've listed 200. And each student has to pick one and write a paper on what should be US policy vis-a-vis intervention there. Interesting. Students write. You have to, now in her case she picked Balochistan. So she has to study all the Baluchi tribes. She has to understand all their ethnic problems, all the religious problems, what is their economic, who they like, who they don't like, what would be their attitude towards surrounding countries, what would be, who likes the US, who won't like the US, so that there is a position developed, and this position has to be argued very thoroughly as a thesis. Now this is what's been going on. In a very systematic way. The British did it, that was colonial Indology. The Americans have taken over and call it South Asian Studies. And for us to critique it is not denying them their freedom. My call to action is not to reduce the other side's interventions, but to increase our own.